All right. Happy Friday Eve. It's Thursday, and Christopher Lind here coming to you with another episode of Learning Tech Talks. It's a bit of an ad hoc last minute add to the mix. I figured I was getting a little stir crazy here, so I thought I'd go live and have over the past few weeks been asking folks to send in some of their top questions about learning and development. And I thought, hey, you know what? Maybe I can do some Q&A, make it a live session, and make it pretty informal, as are most of my sessions. So I don't have a super strong agenda. As you can imagine, I've been off for a little bit here with baby number 6. So I do have some questions that have come through via poll everywhere. I'm just going to take those as they come. I'm going to go through those in order based on votes. And then if people ask questions live while I'm doing this, I will also answer those live. So you can either do that. Let me do this here. You can either do that at pollev.com/lsharks000, and you can actually vote on the current questions or add in new questions. Or if you want, you can actually comment in and I will respond to those live as well. So anyway, like I said, pretty informal chat conversation, chance to kind of take a break. If I have to step away for a minute, it's just because I have a bunch of kids knocking on the door and my wife is preoccupied. So I'll just hit the clock and take a pause if I need to. But other than that, I think that's it right now. This Friday, just as a heads up, I am streaming a pre-recorded conversation with Vince Hahn. So Mr. Hahn, Lincoln Park reference there, if you missed that. And he and I had a chat a while back. We were talking about chatbots. So on Friday at the usual time, I'll be streaming a conversation between the two of us, really showing the potential of it. I think chatbots are something that they have a bit of a mixed review with folks based on their experience with them. So we go into quite a bit of detail about it. So definitely would encourage you to check that out. And if you're not part of the Learning Sharks community already, come check it out. It's kind of another social media site, but really dedicated to learning practitioners. And we're really focused on that. So anyway, that's community.learningsharks.com. So check that out. So let's get into it. Q&A live, unscripted. So I had a chance to glance at what some of these questions are ahead of time, but for the most part, I didn't really think through or plan. I don't have anything like written out bullet by bullet of how I'm going to answer them. So I'm just going to take them live and give my perspective on them. I probably shouldn't have called it L&D questions answered, because the reality is I don't know that I have the answers to some of these questions. I do have a perspective, though. I have a perspective on all of them. That's for sure. But whether or not it's the actual answer or not, it might be my answer. So hopefully you can find some value in that one way or the other. But let's get started on this. Let me pull it in. Let me pull it into the stream so I can actually pull it up every once in a while here. Let's see. There we go. Let me do this. There we go. Okay. So I've got about 17, 18 questions that have come in priority order. I may go in complete order. I may not. We'll see. It just completely depends on how I'm feeling. So the first one that came through was, and this one has the most votes. Actually, another one has the most votes as well, but they're tied. So the first one was, how do you get C-suite to not only engage with learning and learning tech, but have a learning mindset that trickles down the line? Now, this is a big question. This is a really big question. And I wish I had a super silver bullet answer that everybody could just walk away with and go, oh, okay, well, if I do that, here's the magic hat trick. And suddenly executive leadership is going to be completely on board with L&D. But I have some thoughts on this. I also have some watch outs for it, which is where I'll start. So I think one of the biggest things where I see this go south, or things that we can consider when we think about bringing, whether it's the C-suite, whether it's your business layer, I think C-suite's sometimes the main focus for folks, but a lot of times that's not necessarily where you should start. So the first thing I'll say is you may want to consider, is C-suite really where I need to start? Because that may not be where you need to start. So I think sometimes this aspiration of how do we get the C-suite on board with this first, it might not be the right starting point. You may actually want to start with line management or senior management before you jump to the C-suite. And that may actually get you more traction, because now you have credibility with the operators, the business leaders, the people that are actually out there, so that when you go to the C-suite, you actually have a strong case. So that's a little bit of a counterpoint to the response, that you may not actually want to start with the C-suite, although it does answer the question of how do you get C-suite buy-in. A good way to do it is actually get buy-in from the rank and file first, so you have a really strong case. The other piece that I would add to that, and again, this is my perspective, not my answers to all of these, but one of the things that I think we do sometimes as an industry is we have this desire to get the C-suite and senior leadership to think and talk like we do as learning and talent professionals. We want them to say the same things we're saying and think about things exactly the same way we're thinking about them. And the reality is, maybe someday, maybe some of them will get there over time, things like, but the reality is, I don't really know that that's what we actually want. I think that's what we think we want. We want to get them there, basically advocating and saying exactly what we're saying. But in some regards, where I've seen that happen, it doesn't feel authentic, because they're basically parroting what we're telling them to say. Hey, so sometimes I'll see advice on this suggestion and they're like, put out talking points or put together, exactly what you want them to say, create talking head videos of them saying what you want to say. And what I've found with that is it actually loses some of the authenticity behind it. So this idea that you want the C-suite, senior management, whatever, talking and engaging with learning the very way we do, it actually might not be the right approach. In fact, the second part of the question is, how do you get that to trickle down the line? Well, by trying to get them to think and talk like we do, you actually may be adding more burden to that, because now for it to trickle down the line, not only do you have to get the C-suite thinking, talking, engaging with things the way you are, that now has to translate all the way down the line. So to some degree, I personally have found more success talking and listening to the way they're speaking, the way they're articulating problems, the way they're articulating challenges, the way they're doing that, connecting the dots to the work we do, being able to connect how some of the solutions we have or what we're trying to do can actually solve for that. But then actually by solving those problems, you're actually creating their own narrative of what we're doing. And I've actually found that to have more influence on the organization, because now they're talking in their own language. They're not trying to remember what you told them they're supposed to say. They're not trying to remember how they're supposed to say it. And then when they talk to people, they're talking the language that they're used to talking. So I think with some of these things, some of the watch outs are stop trying to make them us, stop trying to make them think and talk like us. The other one is you don't necessarily need to, bring them all the way. So I think that's part of it. I think the previous part of the answer I gave was you might not want to start with the C-suite. So there's two parts. In terms of what you can do, there was a whole lot of like, hey, don't do this, don't do that, don't think about it this way. And it's not always the right approach either. But I think one of the other things that we can do, and this is something that gets talked about a lot in the industry, I don't know that we necessarily are super, super good at doing this. And I'll be just transparent in my own journey since joining ChenMed on this. It's easy to get caught up in what we do with learning and development and know what it is exactly we're trying to solve and speak in our own language, that we forget to actually translate that and actually do that to solve problems for our business leaders. So honestly, one of the greatest ways to get C-suite buy-in, to get C-suite whoever buy-in, is to actually solve their problems instead of coming to them with the problems we think need to be solved and trying to influence or convince them that that's actually the problem they need to fix versus what's important to them. So I think actually coming to them can be a really powerful way to do that. And that naturally creates a lot of downstream influence. So that's a few thoughts that I have on the mix. But going back to the transparent side of this, one of the benefits I've had of being off the past couple of weeks and for the next week and a half still is I've actually spent a ton of time, just even me personally, reprocessing the vision that I've put together and the direction that I'm going, and spending a lot more time actually translating that back to what I know is going on in the business, in the organization, and saying, okay, And granted, it was aligned before, but I don't know that my story always directly connected to that. And I think my challenge is probably a challenge I see with a lot of L&D professionals. We've got it up here. We get, oh yeah, no, this is how we solve this problem, but we forget to tell that connective tissue between the two. And so we end up just sounding like we're doing L&D type things. And so even for me personally, over the last couple of weeks, I've been spending a lot of time thinking through, okay, how do I tell this narrative of here's what we're trying to do that's tied to these 3 strategic priorities in the business, and then break that down into tangible ways to actually do it. And again, we'll see. So I've done this in the past and gotten thrown out of offices. I've done this in the past and it's had massive success. So that's where I say I have a perspective on this. I've had some things that have worked really well. I've done the same thing in other places and they haven't worked so well. So hopefully that answer, non-answer perspective piece gave a little bit of guidance. So boss, I see you chimed in. I'm going to pull your question up and I'm going to divert from the actual poll everywhere because it's boss. I got to say this. So I'll pull this one up. Thanks, boss, for the congrats. Hope we'll come out of this lockdown. And okay, what do you hope? So let me ask this. Thank you. First of all, thanks, boss, for the congrats. Good to see you. It's been a bit. And for anybody else watching, feel free to ask questions live. I'll take these. So your question, boss, just so I get this, and I'll also put this in the show notes. What do you hope will come out of this lockdown and lack of face-to-face situation? So video is face-to-face. You're kind of acknowledging that from either a learning design or learning delivery revolution or evolution. So and you correct me if I'm wrong, boss, on what you're actually asking, but I think I get the gist of what you're asking, but feel free to clarify if I start rambling down a path and you're like, that's not what I was talking about. So if I'm understanding this, over the last 18 months, everyone was forced to punt out of a in-person environment. And suddenly they're all remote. Everybody's out here. And now we're kind of back. I actually did a talk on this. Here's one of these rabbit trails. I started this app called Wisdom.app. And I just kind of download my thoughts on things. I actually talked about this yesterday. So over the 18 months now we're kind of coming back into this environment where we've got this hybrid, but there's a lot of organizations. You look at what Google's doing. They're doing some massive investments in New York, $2 billion. Anyway, to bring everybody back in, as things start to shift back or go back to some semblance of what they were before, what do I personally hope will come out of this lockdown as it relates to learning? So there's a couple things. Well, actually, there's probably a lot of them. But one of them is this. I think organizations have come to accept, and I hope this sticks, and they don't forget once they can go back to what it was. I think a lot of organizations have realized that virtual, digital can work. It can work. Now, granted, is it different? Does it require more effort in some ways? Do you have to think about it differently? Yes, but I think largely people remember, that it works, and hopefully that sticks. And I think that's also hopefully what I think sticks is that it creates a greater empathy for people who won't come back to the office. I think pre-COVID, whatever you want to call it, if you were in the office, you really didn't think about people out there, even learning and development people. And so going back to tie it to your question of learning people specifically, what do I hope we learn from this is that we have to think about these people because they exist. And now in a post-pandemic world, that percentage of them is going to be larger than it even was before. So I don't just hope, I hope we don't forget about this. I hope we learn this lesson, because the reality is if we don't, it's going to have a really dramatic negative impact. So hybrid design, tying it directly to your question from a learning design standpoint, I hope everyone has really upped their game and skills in hybrid design. And when I say hybrid design, I mean it works whether you're remote, you're in person, it really doesn't matter. It just works seamlessly one way or the other. And you don't have to treat them as two distinctly separate audiences. That's where I think I'd like us to get to the point where you know what? If you happen to be in the office, great. If you're not, it's fine. It works the same. And we don't have to separate you from the two. Because I think for a lot of people, there were a lot of people who either they couldn't come, they couldn't travel, it didn't work for them, timing didn't work. So they were actually missing out on this. So I do hope that it has forced us to really think differently about this and not just say, oh yeah, digital works, so we should all go get an LXP or an LMS and like not, I mean, yes, but that's not really what I'm getting at. I'm talking more about hopefully we're thinking completely different about this. Another one that I hope comes out of this is I hope everybody took a real sock in the mouth for things that we've taken for granted and just have assumed that we're in a really good spot. So we in learning have often talked about, yeah, we need to do leadership skills, soft skills, and it's always been a focus area. But I don't think we really put the intentionality behind what about it. I mean, honestly, my experience with a lot of soft skills and leadership skills, they've been very generic. It's nice aha moments here and there, but it's not really getting at the crux of execution of these skills. So how do you deliver this? As an example, communication. Pre-pandemic, people still said, yeah, communication skills are important, and there were programs for communication and things like that. But I don't know that people really, really thought deeply about when we say communication skills, what do we mean? Like, what does that look like? And how do we actually grow and develop people's communication skills? Because I think in many regards, there was a bit of an attitude of, well, I mean, they're not that bad. We talk, we interact, communication skill. Yeah, it's good for people to get better at it, but it's not really that big of a problem. Suddenly COVID hit and we went, ooh, turns out we actually aren't that great at communicating. Same with leadership. And I guess communication could be argued to be a leadership, but being a really good people leader. We knew it was a problem. We said, yeah, we should be developing frontline leaders, first-time managers, even senior leaders, but it wasn't necessarily seen as a paramount issue. And then everything hit the fan and we realized, whoa, we've got leaders that they don't know how to focus on outcomes. They're focused on activities. They don't really know how to engage with their team. They don't really know how to connect their goals to the bigger mission. We're seeing all this data coming out about people saying they want to work for an organization that they feel they're connected to the mission. Well, who connects that to the mission? Their direct line management. Why is it a growing gap? Because we really weren't that good at it before. And we didn't realize it because the proximity of being near a corporate environment made us feel connected in some regards. I feel connected to something because I go into a building and I see something. Well, now I don't have that. Maybe we really weren't that good at it before, but we were making it up in other ways. So I think those are some of the big ones. I think from a learning design and learning delivery, I think another one that I would add to this that I really hope we learn from this is kind of this softer side of stuff. And I don't mean squishy beanbags and hookahs. I mean caring about people and incorporating that into whatever we're doing. So again, just having a greater empathy that not everyone's situation is exactly the same. And that doesn't mean we need to make 37 different versions of every course or program that we have, but it does mean that we should think a little less about, okay, let's be super prescriptive in how everything is, because this is how I think it needs to work. When hopefully the last 18 months has taught us that what my experience is, or what my expertise, or what I know, or how I do things, is a little bit different than somebody else. And so while it's important to give guardrails and guidance and provide some of that structure for people, I don't know that we need to be as hyper prescriptive as sometimes we have been in the past. So hopefully that's another thing. And then the last one, again, I could probably talk about this question the whole time, but I won't. I'll stop after this last one. Is I think the importance of experience is hopefully something we don't forget. And I don't just mean improving UX in what we're doing. I mean really thinking holistically about what's the actual experience like for a user? How do we make this more experiential for them? How do we not just make this more content for them to consume, but we make this something where they're doing something? And again, thinking differently about how we do that. Let's not limit this to when we can fly everybody into corporate once every 3 years type of a thing. Let's think about this more broadly. So I think that push to kind of think outside the box, maybe try things that we haven't done before. And I guess that would be a fifth one that I would add is, I hope coming out of this forced us to start thinking differently about things and being more creative and not saying, well, here's why we can't do that. Instead saying, all right, well, I don't know, we need to do this. What are some things we can try? What are some different ways that we haven't done in the past? Because before we didn't really have to. We maybe did certain times, but I don't think anything has quite pushed us to the lengths that we've had to go as these last few months. And hopefully we don't forget that and become complacent in what we do moving forward, which it's a risk for everybody. It's a risk not just for learning and development. I would say the same thing to HR leaders. I'd say the same thing to business leaders. Like we can't go back to complacent once this all winds down and be like, whoo, like that's behind us. Now, let's move on with things. All right. So hopefully, boss, I answered your question because that was a pretty long answer, but hopefully that was a little bit of my thoughts on this one. So next one, because I said if you ask questions live, I will prioritize those over the poll everywhere ones. So Peter, good to see you. Peter Wittig, it has been too long. I hope you're doing well. And so Peter's question, from your perspective, what conditions make an employee most open to trying something new regards to training employees? An event, a person, stats? Oh, good question. So I'm trying to remember. I was reading I've been doing a lot of reading while I've been off. And I know I came across some stats somewhere on some of this, but I'm not going to quote stats because I won't get it right. And then somebody's going to call me on it and be like, that's not the actual right statistic, or it's actually this, or you said it from the wrong source. So I'll give perspective on this one. Over the years, in terms of conditions where you can really do this. Now there's two ways to think about this, Peter. And I think this is, I'll kind of bucket this into two different categories. One is if your question's talking about this from like an enterprise level. Okay. So if we're thinking about this at the enterprise, we're trying to cast the widest net across the organization and get as many people to try something new. We're rolling out this new thing and we're trying to get as much engagement as we can from this large percentage of the population. That's going to be a little bit different than if I said, hey, if you're really looking to, where should you prioritize as an L&D function to say, where can we get the biggest lift? Like, what are the things we can focus on to try? I think those are two different answers that I would give and again, I'm doing this off the top of my head. So I know the second I finish answering this question, I'm going to have more to say about it, but it's fine. So we'll do these two first. If I'm thinking about this from an enterprise standpoint, okay, casting the widest net, you're looking at doing something different. You're trying to change something relatively dramatic and get the biggest number of people to engage with it. I would say on this one, this is, I'm even going to contradict myself in this because I've seen it work two ways. So I was about to say, try and do a step change. Okay. And what I mean by step change, Vineet, the head of, Microsoft, not Teams, their new EXP, Viva. Okay, he and I were talking about this. For big enterprise changes, step changes are ideally the best way to do it if you're trying to cast the widest net. Because if you try and make a massive change overnight, the org's going to just spit it out. I just always have this mental picture of somebody who takes a drink of coffee that's way too hot and it just spews all over the place because it's just too extreme of a shift and the org just rejects it. And so a lot of times when I look at these kinds of things, I'm thinking about it through the lens of, okay, if you're trying to get here, and I'm doing this on my desk as if you can see it, I'm trying to get here and I'm over here, I'm not going to launch with over here because that's that hot coffee. It's going to hit the org and as soon as it hits, it's back out again. So normally I would say, think about it in terms of phases. So if you're looking at what are the conditions, it's figuring out where the organization's at and then meeting them where they are and then stepping them forward through that. So I think those are some of the conditions that make it really ideal to do some of that, is to kind of figure out that step change and tie it. If we didn't learn anything over the last 18 months, it's that employees crave purpose and connection to what's going on in the organization. So, and I have an example of this where I was helping a company work through a big LXP implementation and selection. And we actually put in a lot of effort connecting it to a large organizational culture priorities change. So it really felt like, hey, this isn't just a thing. This isn't the flavor of the week. This is part of who we are as an organization, and part of what it means to be an employee here is to do this. And so that we were creating this big change in and of itself in the organization. And we basically latched onto that and said, hey, and we got good traction. But at that same time, we also didn't completely turn the organization on its head with what they were doing from a learning and development standpoint. So we actually, because initially going into this, there was thoughts of, do we do talent mobility and like all these crazy things? And we dialed it way back because we said, hey, it's good that we're tying this to this big organizational transformation, but let's not get so caught up in that we try and do it all at once, because then hot coffee analogy hits in again. So trying to find that enterprise change that's happening and then connecting seems to, in my experience, have been a pretty ripe environment for these big enterprise changes, because there's plenty of them. I mean, you look at what's going on in most organizations, unless they have organizational ADD, there's normally some major change in the organization that's happening that's sustainable long enough that you can connect into. The big thing is then when you do that, don't just flip the script on what you're trying to do. So that's a big one. On the smaller ones, if we're talking about this on a more personal level, like on a team level or a functional level, where do employees do this? David James and the Loop team talk about this a lot. And this actually ties to my bigger answer too, for the big ones. Big points in change in people's professional lives and personal lives. That's one of the things we've learned over the last 18 months. Like personal life stuff actually is a ripe opportunity. Sometimes can be harder to know, but if you have managers in tune with their people, they can kind of start seeing this. And so with this is what you can start to tap into to try and get some of this stuff to happen, is say, where are there major changes? So honestly, like an easy target, and this is one I'm focused on right now, onboarding is an easy target. When are people open to trying something new? When they're joining a new organization or switching jobs within the organization. Why? It's a massive change. They don't really have a baseline to compare it to. So why not hit them with something new? So a lot of times in the past, when I've experimented with new technologies or new approaches or something creative that's maybe a little outside the box, I've tried to tie it to and target it at things that are really different. It's a completely different thing. One example that wasn't even onboarding, because like I said, onboarding is like an easy one to pick on. Like, oh, people are new, fix onboard. But another one was, and this is where you can do it within the organization. I was with one organization and they were completely rethinking the way they were doing big events, the way they were sending salespeople to big events. It was a radically different thing. And so they were changing the whole game. The rules of the game had been changed. And so everybody who was going to be going to this event now, they had to think differently about everything, not just learning and development, but like how to dress, how to approach things, the types of things to think about, the products, like everything was changing. And so we said, look, they are going to be in a state of disarray as it is. Now, granted, this is where you have to do it carefully and where I've seen this go south. You don't go, they're going to be in absolute chaos. Let's throw more chaos on top of them. No, but what we actually did is we said, we know this is the state of chaos they're going to be in. So we know some of these new approaches, these different way of doing things is actually going to help reduce some of the chaos. So they're in this state of uncertainty, discomfort, all this stuff. let's throw something that's a little outside the box of what we've formally done into the mix. And we actually saw tremendous adoption that then carried forward, because what happened was they had no choice and they were scrambling. And so when they hit this, they had these new creative approaches. What happened is after they went through it, they went, that was really different. That was a really different experience than I've had. What was that? What did you do? Because I haven't done that. And suddenly that opened the door and we started having conversations about trying new things. So an example of this tied to this was, and this goes in the way back machine, but I did a similar thing with augmented reality probably 10, 12 years ago, where the organization was going through a big transformation with the way we were dealing with incoming folks, clients, incoming potential customers. And so the whole experience was different. And we said, this is the prime time to try augmented reality, because we'd tried to talk about it before and people just looked at us like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I don't really care. And we tried to build the use cases and nobody really had an interest. It seemed weird and wonky and outside the box. And people didn't want to. But suddenly there was this organizational shift happening. And we said, you know what? Augmented reality is actually a really good way to solve this. And we didn't talk about it in terms of augmented reality. This goes back to my previous question of how do you get C-suite buy-in. We didn't talk in learning ease. We didn't use our learning language, but we did say, you're going through this transformation. We're trying to do this. We think this is one of the big problems you have. We think we can solve it with this. We didn't even use the word AR. And they said, that's interesting. That sounds intriguing. We got buy-in for it. We did it and it worked. And suddenly the entire organization said, what the heck was that? And then we had their attention. And so again, I think from a condition standpoint, but if I was talking to a people leader, what kind of conditions? Same thing. Look for those opportunities in your teams, in your people, where they're going through some pretty big monumental changes or changes. Just as an example, I've had people on my teams that the birth of a child, and I guess maybe this is most relevant because I just had a kid, is birth of a child, they suddenly started rethinking their professional goals. And so they were more engaged in learning and development. I've had people go back to school because they had a kid and they always wanted to do their grad school. And that was kind of the trigger that did that. So again, big changes in people's lives, whether that's organizationally, enterprise, or personally, a lot of times open the doors for people to experiment with new things. And honestly, the last 18 months is a perfect example of it. The world got flipped on its head. How many digital transformation projects that were scoped for 3 years got pulled off in 2 months and are still sticking around? Well, a lot. And it's because there was this massive change, this ripe environment for people to go, good grief, we got to do something like we've never done before, or we're just not going to make it. So that's, again, I guess those are kind of similar answers to both questions, but I think the nuance is in how you would execute. And I think as a learning leader, when I've done this in the past, the way I think about it at an enterprise level, the conversation's a little bit different at an enterprise level than I would have on a personal or a functional or a team level. Okay. So I don't have any more live questions in the chat, so I'll switch back over to the poll everywhere. But if you have any other ones, feel free to ask. Like I said, it's casual conversation. It's a chance for me to talk to non-little kids. So it's a breath of fresh air in some regards. So the other top-rated question I got was, how are you measuring soft skills? I love this one. I was actually really excited. It was winning, by the way. It was winning in votes until right before I went live. And I was excited. I was excited to be able to answer that first, but it's fine because I still have time, so I can answer it. So how are you measuring soft skills? I love this question because I cannot tell you how many times I've been in conversations where people have said, you can't measure soft skills. And I get this smirk. If you've ever worked with me, you can see it on my face. I get this smirk like, oh, really? Let's have this conversation right now. Because I have been told, I don't know how many times over my career, that you cannot measure soft skills. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And you can actually tie it to organizational performance. And if anybody tells you you can't, they're wrong, or they haven't done it right in the past. So how am I measuring soft skills? I've done it a lot of different ways over the past, I don't know, couple decades. But there's a few best practices that I think about when I think about measuring soft skills that I think sometimes we trip ourselves up on this. So in terms of how I'm measuring soft skills or how I think about soft skills on this, one of the biggest problems that you have to tackle when it comes to soft skills and measurement that I just don't see enough effort put into is we don't break soft skills down granularly enough. So we leave them in these big ethereal buckets like communications, leadership, influence. Like what? I mean, yeah, of course it's very hard to measure that because that's a very ethereal soft skill. That's not necessarily something tangible that I can say, are you a better communicator? I mean, yes, maybe. I don't know. It depends. What are you talking about? In what environment? In what situations? What specifically are you talking about? And I think that fundamentally is why a lot of times you get this pushback on, well, you can't really measure soft skills. You're right. You can't measure soft skills if it's this job description generic category that has no actual tangible outcomes that you're targeting. Sure. Yeah, I would agree. If that's what you're trying to do, then no, you can't measure soft skills. If you break it down into behaviors, you can. And I'll give a couple examples of this. So whenever I talk about measuring soft skills, I spend a lot of time actually deconstructing the skill itself. Because again, we don't do this enough. We leave things at this very high ethereal level and then we struggle with it. And we throw kind of the spaghetti basket at the wall and we're like, I don't know. It seems like they're kind of a better leader. And, well, yeah, but what noodle are you actually focusing on? And so when it comes to measuring soft skills, this is an area we really decrypt and unpack. I don't even think that's a word. Hang on, I need a drink. Okay, so good, boss. I'm glad this is a question that's come up 3 times. So with this, breaking it down, I'll give you a really good example. Okay, I had one conversation with a leader, and as we were doing this, they said, we need our people to be better influencers. Okay. I mean, I could have worked with my teams. We could have ran out and found the latest and greatest in influencing skills, come up with some really cool model for how to do it and made everybody do it and said, I think they did good. Did they pass the test? I guess it's better. But we didn't. We said, well, when you say influencing, where are they not influencing? And I will tell you, this is not easy if you're not used to doing this, because it is met with some, grimaces, some raised eyebrows, because honestly, a lot of times the leaders who make these requests don't really know what they're asking. They know they need more influence. They need better communication, but they haven't necessarily thought deeply about how. And so a lot of this time is spent on actually unpacking, what do you mean? So in this example, it was, well, we need them to be better influencers. Where do we need them to be better influencers? Well, and it took a while. This wasn't like a 10-minute conversation, but it was, well, where are they not, who are they trying to influence? Who do you really need them to influence? We were able to narrow it down to this specific group of people. Okay, well, it's when they interact with these specific people. When do they interact with these specific people? Well, we were able to narrow down when that happens, about how long those conversations take, and what a good conversation and a bad conversation actually look like. We actually had this thing torn apart into a very, very granular experience. And we said, okay, so based on that, and we were able to break it down into 4 behaviors. There were 4 key behaviors that we were able to identify within this conversation between this person and this person that defined whether it was an influential conversation or a non-influential conversation. And we broke it down to that level. And then at that point, within each of those 4 behaviors, we were able to say, what is good on one of these behaviors? What is medium? What is bad? I think there were 4 or 5 categories. I don't remember. But all in all, we were able to do that. And so we were able to actually say, okay, we've got these we have influence, but we broke that down into these 4 behaviors. And within those 4 behaviors, we had different tiers of what each of those behaviors looked like from a good and bad standpoint. And now we were able to actually recreate. And this goes back to one of the things, boss, I was saying about hopefully we learned from the last 18 months is to be more focused on experience than content, because we could have, and we did, I didn't want to, but we did put together some learning content around this of what are these 4 behaviors? Why do they matter? Where do you do this type of a thing? But really where most of the energy was focused on was, let's put you in situations where you have to practice these 4 behaviors, and let's measure how well you execute these 4 behaviors. And then we can see whether you're progressing in your development in those 4 behaviors. And so we did it, and we were able to actually baseline where people were at. We were able to measure progress forward, and we were actually able to connect that to orders in the organization and say, we're moving, trending upwards in orders because we're making people more influential, and being more influential is happening through these behaviors, and these things happen. And granted, it wasn't an overnight thing, but it was surprisingly quick how quickly we were able to do that. And I think where it was going, so this was a long time ago, but we were doing this old school. So, we were using rubrics and people and all of this stuff. But we were able to do it, and we were able to actually tangibly measure soft skills, and we were able to tie it to performance. We were able to say, not only are we improving soft skills, but we were able to tie it to performance. And what was interesting about when we broke it down to that granularity is originally we had 5 behaviors. We had 5, and we found out through the data that one of them didn't matter. It really had absolutely no influence on it. And this is where the learning analytics side gets really exciting, because when you start capturing data at that level, you can actually start to isolate variables and figure out what's going on. And that's what we were able to do. We were able to look at this influence, which could have just been this generic blah, and we go through it and we don't really know what happens, but we didn't. We chose to do it really well. And instead, we were able to unpack this thing and say, we think it's these 5. We did some experiments. We found out one of them was completely unrelated. It didn't matter whether you were good at it or not. So we threw it out, and we said it's these 4, and we can actually help people get better at these 4. And it improved, and it actually drove performance. So whenever somebody says you can't measure soft skills, like I said, I just get a little smirk, because yeah, you can. And the thing is this is one of the things I'm most excited about with technology is that framework. And this is where I think a long time ago, we still did a lot of that, but it was a lot of work. And so we really had to prioritize, can we do this? Because this is a lot of effort. Technology is actually making this a lot easier and a lot more scalable. So Peter, you'll appreciate this plug on here, but right, immersive tech is a good way to actually do some of this, because you can actually build digital simulations for soft skills. That's another question. I think somebody asked it. I don't know, but I do get asked that a lot. Do you think VR is for soft skills? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because if you look at it through that lens I just described in terms of how do you measure behavior and tie it to performance, well, then immersive technology is a perfect example of how to do it on a scalable level, because you can design simulations and build into those simulations key trigger points to watch for based on the rubrics of, okay, did this person do this? And now with natural language understanding, we can actually understand conversation and analyze the conversation and say, they didn't do this well, or they did do this well, or they said this, or they didn't say that. So this rubric that used to be very manual, and by the way, people aren't terribly objective at assessing skills, at behaviors. I mean, if I assess somebody and boss, I have you assess the same people, you're going to have wildly different measurements than we do. Even if you try and calibrate, we're not going to be perfect on. Technologies, it's not biased. It just sees what it is. So you're just programming it. It's listening to the voice. It's watching what's happening. It's seeing how long it took you to do different things. And then it's making an objective assessment of how quick were you at doing this? How good were you at, exercising this statement? I had one, and I know I'm kind of going off on this, but this one I get really excited about, which is why I was hoping it was going to be the first one, was I did one experiment in my incubator where we were actually analyzing conversations and giving people a dashboard of feedback that was fully automated. We were just processing their language and giving them a dashboard of feedback on, you say too much, you speak too fast, you use these phrases, you don't articulate this way. And we had actually programmed things in. So the immersive tech side, some people immediately think, oh gosh, goggles and blah, 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 like I got to do it. No, not necessarily. Yes, I think that's where we should be going. And there's another lesson, boss, from the last 18 months that I hope starts picking up, is that if we aren't playing with immersive tech by now, we need to be. Like, you need to be. And that doesn't necessarily mean all the widgets and gadgets and doodads that sometimes people think about. This example of what I would consider immersive tech was simply capturing a voice print, running it through an AI algorithm that then gave you a dashboard back and told you how well you were. And then you just went through it again and it told you if you got any better at it. And it was a great way to help people get better at communication, the way they spoke. But again, we could actually program that down. But if you don't, going back to the very original response I had on how do you measure soft skills, if you leave them at the ethereal, generic kind of level, you can't do it. And immersive tech won't help you with that. AI won't help you with that. None of the tech will help you with that because it's too generic to do anything with. You actually have to break it down into the actual behavior, the demonstratable behavior. What does that look like where, and defining what good versus bad looks like so that you can then do it. And then it's a ripe target to automate, to use tech for. It's fascinating, some of the stuff you can do. And again, you want to talk immersive tech, if you start looking into where some of this wearable stuff is going, I mean, some of the feedback we can even get on facial movements and haptics and biometric data, I mean, it's insane what we can actually start to assess and improve behavior on if we do it well. Now, again, you got to be careful. And boss, you bring up a really good point. Okay. And that's a fair call out when it comes to some of the immersive tech or AI, is that you're not building bias into the system. Okay. I 100% agree with that. And that goes back to our conversation, I think, on AI ethics or data ethics or something like that, boss. But yes, you got to be careful of that. But the reality is, done right, some of this technology can actually take things that would have taken us just ridiculous amounts of time and money and things like this. And going back to the funding of this, because sometimes I'll get pushback. Well, leadership's not going to buy into this. Okay, then take what I talked about before, find an opportunity where there's a major disruption happening in the organization or within a function or somewhere where this type of skill piece behavior can connect to that, build a use case, partner with an external firm. I mean, I know sometimes people are like, are you advocating for a certain group or fund? No, but I talk to vendors all the time because whenever something comes up, I want to make sure I know who to call and say, look, hey, here's an opportunity that came up. Can you help me pull together something to prove this out? Because I think we might be able to make something happen. And so I think that's what you can do with this, so that you can actually start to understand how to use this technology to do things that, it's not that they were impossible. I don't think anything ever was impossible before, but they were just way too resource intensive or time consuming to actually do at any sense of scale. And now with the possibilities of this, we can do this stuff at an organizational enterprise level with little effort once you get the hang of it. So that's my big answer on measuring soft skills. I get really feisty on this one if people tell me you can't or it doesn't work or whatever. My response is kind of, then you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong if it's not happening. Okay. So let me go to number 3. Let me see what else. Oh, no, I actually want to tackle this because it was leading the ranks in questions. Then somebody downvoted it, but it's fine. I'm going to tackle this one because, hey, I'm the Learning Tech Talks guy. So it's only appropriate. After an LMS, what do you think is the most important learning technology? I love this question because the first thing I'm going to say in response to it is, it assumes that the LMS is the most important piece of learning technology in the ecosystem. And I would actually challenge that I don't think it is. It might be in certain circumstances, but I don't agree that the learning management system is the cornerstone of learning tech anymore. I really don't. I think, there have been a number of conversations I've had with people that they've said, we're looking to get an LMS. And my response has been, why? I mean, why? Help. I'm not saying it's not. I'm not trying to talk people out of an LMS or not out of shifting LMSs, things like that. But I always want to know why, because there is this underlying assumption that the LMS is the heir to the throne for learning tech. And I would say not necessarily. So first, I'll challenge that piece. Is the learning management system the king or queen, whatever, of learning tech? No. Is it an important piece and does it fit in the ecosystem? I would say, excuse me, largely yes, but I don't think every organization needs to have an LMS. So let's put that aside, because again, that's the kind of counterpoint to after the LMS piece that somebody asked. So after the LMS, right, let's just take that out and just say, what do I think is the most important piece of learning technology? This is another one of those questions that I love, but I think sometimes people get mad with my answer, because my answer to a lot of things is it depends. It really, really, really depends based on the organization. Now, the thing is, though, I do have some answers to this, because there are some things that I think are really important that I don't think we're investing enough time and energy in. So if I think about, let me just answer it as, what do I think is really important learning technology? I think if I had my dream state, unlimited budget, believe me, my ecosystem would be, it would be insane. But I realize, even for myself and others that I talk to, it's about picking and choosing what you're trying to do for the business. So I guess my first response to that is always, what are you trying to accomplish for your organization? So, look at it in that sense, because honestly, sometimes, and I'll try not to mention names because then I can get myself in trouble, but sometimes even internal operations, learning technology is the most important thing for an L&D function, because the reality is, what is holding them back from actually being able to do what the business needs from them is they're a hot mess. They're a hot mess internally, and they're literally running around putting out dumpster fires, and they have no structure, organization, or understanding of what the heck is happening in their shop. And in that state, I would say you need some internal ops technology before you need an LMS, because you can go get an LMS, but if you're a hot mess, you're just going to be dumping your hot mess into another piece of learning tech. So this is why when I say it depends, I really do mean, what is the current state? Like, where are you at? What are your biggest pain points? Because what's most important may not be something that you've even thought of. That said, one of the ones that I still feel, I'll talk about some of the ones that I don't think are getting enough attention. Digital adoption platforms, I feel, are vastly, vastly underutilized in our organization. Going back to, if you look at any data right now, one of the number one reasons people don't engage in learning, they don't have time. One of the biggest challenges organizations have right now is burnout from their employees. And a large part of that is because so much people's time is spent learning these new systems that keep rolling out left and right. And then companies aren't happy because they aren't using the system, so they go buy another one thinking that's going to fix the problem. And then just when people were getting the hang of the one they were using, we got rid of O365 and now we're bringing in G Suite. You're like, what? I just got this happens all the time. And so there's this enterprise workforce fatigue that's happening because of the amount of tech that's getting thrown at them. And a digital adoption platform can radically help that. Now, sometimes I'll have L&D leaders go, well, that's outside my scope. Is it though? I don't think it is. If organizational performance is our scope, then it is in our scope. And, I've heard, well, that's IT, that's the digital transformation team. Who cares? Who cares who you think it should own it? That doesn't matter. The question is, do you have that technology as a capability in your organization so that the next time you upgrade Workday or roll out Oracle, instead of having this organizational effort to try and teach everybody what they need to know that they're not going to remember and now they're just fatigued, You just let the system do it for you. And again, I don't want to understate a DAP as though it's some simple piece of tech that requires no management. Like, no, it's a big piece of tech. But do I think if we had more digital adoption technology in our portfolio and we leverage that as part of our toolkit more than we do some of our other things, do I think we'd free up our workforce to have capacity to focus on some of these other things that we want them to do? Yes, I do. And so for that reason, I do think digital adoption technology, I'm not necessarily aligned to any specific brand of it, but I think that capability is a capability, especially in the knowledge worker space. Good grief. If you're an L&D leader and you're overseeing knowledge workers and you're not considering digital adoption technology to help enable, put learning in the flow of work, like whatever buzzword you want to talk about, you're missing out. And again, this is a gap. I mean, I've talked to analysts that are like, what's a DAP? So it's not, you're not at fault if you aren't familiar with what it is. It's not something a lot of people are familiar with, but they should be, because this really is becoming, in my opinion, for knowledge workers and any organization that's using technology, this should be a fundamental cornerstone. I mean, in many regards, this should be something, because the data coming out of it, I mean, there's a million reasons. So I won't get too far because it's going to sound like I'm saying, everybody go buy a DAP. Well, I might actually say that. Everybody should have a DAP, whether L&D owns it or not. Everybody should have that. But I'm not going to say that's what everybody should run out and focus on, because that may not be your focus right now. I think some of the other technology is when I think of knowledge management, and again, this is another one of those ones that people go like, well, that's not really our space. Well, I would say it is, especially because learning and development seems to be pretty hung up on being all about education. So if we're all about education, knowledge management seems to me like it would be a pretty big focus area. So if you look at what some of these new digital tech content platforms are doing and allowing the democratization of content development and then actually making it searchable, findable, replacing, truly becoming a knowledge base, this is part of the suite that we really should be bolstering. I think there are way too many learning organizations that the only content coming out of their shop is SCORM packages. And it's a miss. As far as I'm concerned, it's a miss. It doesn't mean you throw it out. I'm not saying you throw it out, but I'm saying if that's all, if you look across your portfolio and 80+% of it is SCORM packages or tin can, I don't even care if it's tin can AI. My point is, if it's an LMS package, and that's what 80% or more of your stuff is, it's an opportunity for you. It's an opportunity because that is a gap that you are missing that will actually solve major organizational problems. So again, knowledge management, it's fine. We're producing massive amounts of content that nobody can find, nobody can access, and nobody can do. So now again, are some LMSs tackling this by adding content management into it? Yeah, but then you have to ask yourself, is the LMS really where people are going? Probably not. So does it have the capability to integrate that into something else? Is it headless? Does it have an API that can translate out? Maybe. Or do you maybe need to consider an actual dedicated digital content development platform that has some horsepower behind it? So I think this is a huge opportunity. We're not getting away from content or knowledge anytime soon. So is there massive opportunity for us to do a better job with it? Yeah, I would say absolutely. Another one that I think is really important that, again, this goes back to my thoughts on immersive tech. I don't know that there's really a category for this yet, but you start looking at designing differently. The ability to create immersive simulation or immersive environments in some capacity is significant, and we don't have enough of that right now. And again, there's not a ton of it out there. There's some, Peter, I know you're here, so I know there's folks that are doing some of this, but there's not a ton of them. And I think this is an opportunity area for us to continue to explore. So again, my answer is kind of not necessarily saying like this is the most important, because I don't think there is a most important. I've seen some organizations where getting a better webinar platform is the most important thing for them. And it should be. And I've advised them on that. They were thinking of getting an LXP. And I'm like, I think you should get a better webinar platform because your one right now is killing you. So there's that. There's another one though that I was thinking about. Yeah, I don't know. I forget. So I'll have to come back to that one. I know, like I said, I know as soon as I answer this, I'm gonna remember this. I'm gonna do one more. And then I will. Wait, no. Learning tech. Okay. So the one thing I will add to this learning tech though, and this is probably my biggest thing for learning leaders to think about in this space, is that we need to get better at deciding whether we really even need to pursue some of this learning tech. For far too long, we've had this idea that, what we have isn't good enough, so we're going to go create our own. And it's actually adding to this workforce fatigue. So in many regards, I would encourage people to tap into what workforce tech you have. I just look at, like, one of the things that I'm pushing for big time right now and I'm working on is an EXP. I'm focused on an EXP because to me, it doesn't matter if I'm not going to go try and recreate that in my LMS. It doesn't make sense. That's not where people are going for stuff. Like, how do we pull some of this together? So working with some of the enterprise workforce technology and actually mapping back what capabilities are missing is probably really important, because the reality is you can't know what the most important piece of learning tech you need is until you actually know what you have in your organization. And I think that's one of the gaps that I see a lot is we go off to DevLearn and EdCon, or I don't know, I'm literally making up tech names right now, but we go to these things, we see these cool things and we're like, that is so much better than what we have in the organization. Let's go get that, without realizing that the odds of the workforce migrating and shifting their focus to our version of it is pretty slim. I mean, not to shoot some of our stuff in the foot, but it's just like, they're probably not going to, are they going to leave? Are they going to leave Facebook Workplace to come do a chat in the LMS? I don't think so. And maybe we'd be better spent trying to pursue one of these enterprise grade platforms for things instead of a niche learning tech. Now, again, that's not to say it never makes sense, which is why whenever I get asked, like, what's the most or what are the top, I'm like, well, I don't really have an answer to that. Let me do one more and then I'll probably wrap up. My kids are being really good. I'm surprised I haven't had any interruptions so far. But so let me see here. What do you consider learning data and how are you aggregating it for analysis, insight, and impact measurement? What do I consider learning data? This goes back to measuring soft skills. So this is kind of a big question in that I don't really like to differentiate between learning data and other data. I think that can almost be a dangerous area because we start kind of categorizing, well, that's learning data. I'm only looking for workforce data, or that's ops data. I just really kind of consider it data. And now, granted, are there some of these things that are coming from my learning tech suite that we look for? Sure, absolutely. And again, I don't even knock some of the original ones like engagement, engagement, completions, percentage done. We still pull some of that. We've got some of our own behavioral analytics that are coming out based on some of the things I talked about how we're measuring soft skills. So we have some of that unique learning data. But then we're aggregating that together. And I have a couple amazing, shout out to Kwok and Arden on my team. I don't know if they'll ever hear this, but if they do, shout out to them because they're some of the best data people I know. And so they're really kind of looking at the data lake and saying, yes, we've got some stuff being generated from our systems. And this is where I say, I don't really differentiate between learning data and other data in that it's just data. So really when I think about, how am I considering it? I'm considering it, what are we trying to do and what data do we need to be able to measure what we're doing? And then is that being generated from one of our systems or is it being generated from another system somewhere else? And so at that point, we're in partnership with our people analytics team. And so there's a big data lake. There's a data lake that we're going to, and we're basically, it's like a shopping list. We need this, 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 this. And if it doesn't exist in workforce tech, then we look back at our tech stack and say, is that something we can get or we can capture? If not, is this a new capability we need to bring in? And we do that. And then we're aggregating that together and then pulling it into dashboards based on what we're doing. So, this one could probably be an episode in and of itself. Again, I may come back to that one. I'm planning on doing another one of these with a panel later this year, possibly. So it'd be great to get some other perspectives. But with that, I didn't realize that I went way over and I only answered like 5 questions. So with that, I'm actually going to wrap up. Thanks for those of you who joined. Thanks for the questions. Good to see you, boss. Peter, thanks for those of you who made it. I hope you all have a great rest of your Thursday Eve. Have a great night and a great weekend. Bye-bye.